Clara Whitmore did not cry when her father shook the stranger's hand. She had learned long ago that tears cost energy she could not afford. But when Elias Whitmore turned and walked back toward the trading post without once looking at his daughter, without a single word, without a backward glance, something inside Clara went completely silent. Not broken. Silent. The way a woman goes silent when she finally understands that no one is coming to save her. She was 23 years old, and she had just been traded for flour. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end, because this is a story about what happens when everything is taken from you, and you discover you were never as powerless as they made you believe. And drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The morning it happened, Clara had woken before dawn the way she always did. She had stoked the fire from its dying embers. She had melted snow in the iron pot for washing water. She had cut the last of the cornbread into 4 even pieces, one for her father, one for her younger brother Thomas, one for her stepmother Ruth, and one for herself, that she quietly set aside, knowing she would likely give it away before noon. That was how Clara lived. Quietly. Carefully. Always making sure everyone else had enough before she counted what was left for herself. She had been doing it since she was 9 years old, the year her mother died, and her father looked at his 2 children like they were a problem he did not know how to solve. Clara had solved herself. She had become useful. She had become necessary. She had folded herself small enough to fit into whatever space the family needed filled, and she had told herself that was the same thing as being loved. She was wrong. But she did not know that yet on the morning everything changed. The snow had started the night before, and had not stopped. Clara stood at the one small window of their homestead cabin, and looked out at a world that had turned completely white and completely merciless. The Bitterroot Mountains rose behind the valley in dark shapes she could barely see through the falling snow. The tree line was gone. The trail to the nearest settlement was gone. Even the outline of their broken-down barn was fading into white. "Papa," she said quietly, not turning from the window. "We've got maybe 3 days of oats left, maybe 4 if I stretch the portions." Her father did not answer. Elias Whitmore was sitting at the table, and he had been sitting there since before Clara woke up. That was unusual. Her father was a man who moved constantly, always fidgeting, always talking, always finding some excuse to walk away from a conversation that made him uncomfortable. Stillness in Elias Whitmore meant something was wrong. Clara turned from the window. He was looking at his hands. "Papa?" "I heard you," he said. "Then what are we going to do?" Ruth was still in the back room. Thomas was outside somewhere, probably trying to dig a path to the barn. Clara and her father were alone in the way they had rarely been alone since Ruth came into their lives 6 years ago, and something about the quality of that silence, the heaviness of it, made Clara's stomach tighten. "Elias Whitmore," she said, because she had learned that using his full name was the only way to make him look at her directly. "What did you do?" He looked up, and for one moment, just one, she saw something in his face that almost looked like shame. "I made arrangements," he said. "What arrangements?" "For supplies. For the winter." He folded his hands on the table. "We need flour, salt meat, coffee, blankets for the boy. Thomas can't keep sleeping under that burlap, he'll freeze before February." "I know what we need," Clara said. "I've been keeping track of what we need since before you thought to ask." "What arrangements, Papa?" He looked away again. "Caleb Rourke." The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Clara had heard that name exactly twice in her life. Both times it had been whispered. Both times the person saying it had glanced over their shoulder first, the way people do when they're talking about something that frightens them. Caleb Rourke was a man who lived beyond the northern ridge, up in the high country, where the trails disappeared and ordinary men did not follow. He came down into the valley twice a year, maybe 3 times, to trade furs and purchase supplies. He spoke to no one beyond what the transaction required. He was enormous, people said, that broad as a barn door, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of the same granite as the mountains behind him. He had a scar that ran from his left ear down to his jaw that people invented stories about when they had nothing better to do on cold nights. Nobody knew exactly why he had left civilization behind. There were stories. There were always stories about men like Caleb Rourke. But what Clara knew, standing in the freezing kitchen of her father's failing homestead, was that whatever those stories were, her father had used his name in the same sentence as the word arrangements. "What kind of arrangements?" she said. Her voice was very quiet, very controlled, because she already knew. She already knew, and she needed him to say it out loud, needed him to look at his daughter and say the words with his own mouth. "He's got supplies," Elias said. "More than he needs. He stores enough to last 2 winters just by himself up there. A man like that living alone." He stopped, cleared his throat. "He could spare what we need. And what does a man like that want in exchange for what he spares?" Her father's jaw moved. No sound came out. "Papa!" Her voice cracked just slightly on that one word. Not from grief, from fury. "You look at me right now and you tell me." He looked at her. "Company," he said. "Someone to help keep the cabin. Cook. Clean. He's a man who lives alone, and—" "Don't," Clara said. "Don't dress it up. Don't make it sound like something it isn't. You're trading me. You're trading your daughter for flour." "For survival," Elias said sharply, and some of the shame left his face and was replaced by something harder, something that looked like a man convincing himself. "For Thomas's survival. The boy is 8 years old, Clara. You want me to let him freeze. You want me to watch my son starve because I was too proud to make a hard choice." "Your son," Clara said softly. The word sat between them. "Your son, not your daughter. Your son." She understood then, with a clarity so cold, it felt like stepping outside without a coat, exactly what she was worth to Elias Whitmore. She had always known it somewhere in the back of her mind, in the place where women store the truths that are too painful to look at directly. She was useful. She was capable. She worked harder than any man she had ever met and asked for nothing in return. But she was not Thomas. She was not the son. She was the other one. The girl. The spare. The one you could afford to trade. "When?" Clara said. Her father blinked. He had expected tears. He had expected pleading. He had not expected that single flat word delivered like a verdict. "This morning," he said. "I'm meeting him at Hadley's trading post. He'll be there at noon." "Does Ruth know?" A pause. She agreed it was the right thing. Of course she had. Clara nodded once. She went to the back room and she put on every layer of clothing she owned. Her wool dress, her patched coat, her worn boots that let in water at the left heel. She did not pack a bag because she had nothing to pack. Everything in the homestead had been purchased with her father's money or Ruth's contributions. Clara had never owned anything that was truly hers. Not even the patchwork quilt she slept under, which had been her mother's, and which Ruth had quietly claimed as her own 2 years ago. She came back into the kitchen. Thomas was standing in the doorway now, stomping snow from his boots, his face red with cold. He looked at her with his big brown eyes, their mother's eyes, eyes that Clara had always loved, even when everything else about her life was difficult to love. And he said, "Clara, where you going?" She crossed the room and hugged him. She held him for a long time. Howe was confused by it. He squirmed a little the way 8-year-old boys do when they're being embraced too tightly. But he didn't pull away. He never pulled away from Clara because Clara was the one who had always held him together, who had sung him back to sleep after nightmares, who had told him stories about their mother, so he wouldn't forget a woman he was too young to remember clearly. "You be good," she told him into his cold hair. "You eat everything on your plate. Don't let Ruth tell you that you're too old to be afraid of the dark. You're not." "Clara, you're scaring me." "Don't be scared," she said. She pulled back and looked at his face. "I love you. You remember that. Whatever anybody tells you, whatever you hear later, you remember that I love you, and this isn't anything that has to do with you." Thomas looked at their father. Elias Whitmore was looking at the floor. The ride to Hadley's trading post took 40 minutes in the wagon, which was 39 minutes longer than Clara needed to understand with perfect certainty that no miracle was coming. She sat in the wagon bed wrapped in a piece of oilcloth, watching the snow fall, and she did not cry. She had decided in the kitchen that she was not going to cry in front of her father, was not going to give him the particular satisfaction of seeing her fall apart, when he had clearly already made his peace with what he was doing. She thought about her mother instead. Margaret Whitmore had been the kind of woman who laughed easily and worked without complaint and made a home out of whatever she was given, however little that was. She had made their homestead feel like a place worth living in. She had grown flowers in cans on the windowsill. She had taught Clara to read from the one Bible they owned, tracing the words with a patient finger, making Clara say each syllable out loud until it was certain. "You are worth more than you know, baby girl," she had said once when Clara was 7 and had come home crying because the Miller boy had called her raggedy at school. The people who tell you otherwise are telling you about themselves, not about you. Clara had believed her then. She was trying hard to believe her now. Hadley's Trading Post was a low, broad building at the edge of a small settlement that called itself a town without having quite earned the title. It had a general store, a smithy, a church that doubled as a schoolroom, and Hadley's, which served as post office and supply depot and unofficial courthouse all at once. On an ordinary day, it would have had 2 or 3 customers, maybe 4 in summer. On this day, the place was nearly empty, except for the man standing at the far end of the counter. Clara did not immediately understand that she was looking at Caleb Rourke because he had his back to the door, and all she saw at first was the sheer width of his shoulders, the mass of his buffalo coat, the dark hair that touched the back of his collar. Then he turned because the door opening had let in a gust of cold air, and Clara saw his face. He was not what the stories had prepared her for. She had expected something monstrous, something that matched the whispers. A man whose outside looked the way people said his inside was brutal, hard, devoid of feeling. Instead, she saw a man who looked tired. Deeply, profoundly tired in the way that has nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with carrying something heavy for too long. He had the scar, yes. It ran from just below his left ear to the edge of his jaw, pale against his weathered skin. His face was broad and angular, the face of a man who had spent years looking into wind and sun and cold, and been shaped by all three. His eyes were a dark gray, the color of sky before a serious storm, and they were sharp in a way that made Clara think of birds of prey, not cruel, but utterly unsettlingly alert. He looked at her, not at Elias, at Clara, and something happened in his expression that she did not expect. Something that looked almost like recognition. Not as if he knew her, but as if he knew in the way that people who have been through certain kinds of suffering develop an eye for it in others, exactly what this moment was, and exactly what it was costing her. Her father stepped forward. "Rourke," he said, extending his hand. Caleb Rourke looked at the hand. He did not take it immediately. He held Elias Whitmore in that quiet measuring gaze for long enough that the silence became its own kind of statement. Then he shook the hand. Once. Brief. "You brought her," he said. His voice was low, roughened, not unkind, but stripped of all performance, the voice of a man who said exactly what he meant and nothing else. "Said I would," Elias said. His own voice carried the slick cheerfulness of a man trying very hard to pretend this was an ordinary transaction. "Clara's a hard worker. You won't find any complaint with her. She cooks well. She's strong. Mr. Whitmore," Caleb said. Elias stopped. "I didn't ask you to sell her to me," Caleb said. "You came to me. I want to be clear about that." Elias blinked. "Well, yes, that's right. And the supplies are already being loaded on your wagon. My man saw to it before you arrived." Elias brightened. "That's yes. I appreciate that, Rourke, I truly." "You can go," Caleb said. Another silence. Elias looked at Clara for the first time since they'd arrived. She looked back at him, and this was the moment she had braced for. This was the moment she had been preparing herself for during the 40-minute wagon ride. The moment when she would have to watch her father turn away and leave her behind. And she had told herself she would not cry. She had promised herself she would stand straight and give him nothing. Not one tear, not one "please don't go." "Take care of yourself," Elias Whitmore said to his daughter. Not "I'm sorry," not "I love you," not even her name. Take care of yourself. As if she had chosen this. as if she was the one walking away. He was out this door before she could answer. She heard the creak of the wagon, the shuffle of hooves, and then the sound of wheels cutting through fresh snow, fading, gone. Clara stood very still. She breathed in through her nose. She breathed out through her mouth. She did not cry. The man who now, by all the brutal accounting of the frontier, owned her, was watching her from across the counter. He had not moved. He had not spoken. He was simply watching with those storm-gray eyes, giving her time she hadn't known she needed. Old Hadley himself was somewhere in the back room, making a point of being very busy and very invisible, which was its own kind of mercy. "Well," Clara said finally. Her voice was steadier than she had any right to expect it to be. "I suppose we ought to go." Caleb Rourke nodded slowly. He reached up and pulled on his hat, settled it, and moved toward the door. He paused when he drew level with her. He was enormously tall up close. She came to perhaps his shoulder, and he looked down at her with that exhausted, watchful face. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Clara," she said automatically, because she had never liked being called Miss Whitmore. It made her feel like a schoolteacher or a maiden aunt. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one. "Clara," he said. "My name is Caleb, not Rourke, not whatever else they call me down here." A pause. "You don't have to be afraid of me." She looked up at him. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. And the strange, terrifying, completely unexpected truth of it was that she meant it. She was furious. She was grieving. She was so angry at her father that it felt like a fire in her chest that she didn't have enough water to put out. She was frightened of the future, frightened of the mountain, frightened of the winter that was bearing down on all of them without mercy or apology. But she was not frightened of this man. She didn't know why. She didn't know if it was the way he'd looked at her when she walked in. Not the way a man looks at something he's purchased, but the way a person looks at another person who is hurting, or whether it was the way he had cut her father off mid-sentence, or whether it was simply that Clara Whitmore had used up her entire capacity for fear on the people who had actually earned it. Caleb held the door open for her. She walked through it. The cold hit her like a wall, and she pulled her inadequate coat tighter around herself and looked up at the sky, which was the color of dirty wool and still full of snow that hadn't finished falling yet. His horse was tied at the post outside, a big roan mare, dark with winter coat, who regarded Clara with the quiet intelligence that good horses have. Caleb untied her without ceremony and turned to look at Clara. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Some," she said. "Not in a while." He nodded. He put his hands around her waist, careful, impersonal, the way a man lifts a piece of freight, and set her up on the horse before swinging up behind her. He was heavy and warm at her back, blocking the worst of the wind. He clicked in his tongue, and the mare started forward. The trail led north, then up, then further north, and further up, still into the white silence of the mountains. Clara looked back once. The settlement was already disappearing behind them, swallowed by snowfall and distance, becoming something that looked less and less real the further they rode from it. She turned forward. She did not look back again. They rode for nearly 2 hours without speaking. Clara had expected that to be uncomfortable, had expected the silence to feel like pressure, like something that needed to be filled with reassurances or explanations or negotiations about what her life was going to look like now. But Caleb Rourke was not a man who filled silence with noise. He simply rode. And somewhere in the second hour, as the trail narrowed, and the trees closed in around them, and the snow fell soft and steady through the branches, Clara became aware of something strange. She was not thinking about what was behind her. She was watching the trail ahead. When the wind sharpened and cut through her thin coat like a knife, Caleb reached past her without a word and unstrapped something from behind the saddle, a buffalo robe heavy and warm, and wrapped it around her shoulders. She startled at the sudden warmth. "Thank you," she said. He said. It was not a long response. But there was something in it, a roughness, a brevity, that was not coldness, but was something else. Something that Clara, who had spent years learning to read the people she lived with in order to survive them, recognized slowly and with some surprise. He was self-conscious. This enormous, fearsome, allegedly monstrous man, wrapping a robe around a woman he barely knew, had made a small, involuntary sound because he didn't know what else to do with the moment. She didn't say anything else. But something inside her, some tight-braced waiting thing, loosened by the smallest possible degree. The cabin, when they reached it, was not what she had imagined. She had tried not to imagine it too specifically during the ride, because every image she had conjured was worse than the one before it, and she had determined that she would deal with the reality of her situation when it was in front of her and not before. But even her most cautiously optimistic imagining had not produced this. The cabin was solid. Not ornate, not luxurious, not anything that could be called comfortable by the standards of any life she had previously lived, but solidly, carefully built by someone who had understood that a poorly made shelter in a Montana winter was a death sentence. The logs were fitted tight. The roof was steeply pitched to shed snow. There was a covered porch that kept the wind off the door. Inside, the fire had been banked low, but not out, and the cabin was warmer than any room she had been in for months. She stood just inside the threshold and felt the warmth come at her, like something she had forgotten the existence of. And for one terrible moment, she almost cried, not from grief, but from the sheer physical relief of it. She pressed her lips together and did not. Caleb moved past her and built up the fire with the efficient movements of someone who had done it 10,000 times. She looked around at the interior of the cabin. One large room with a cooking area, a table, 2 chairs. Shelves along one wall, neatly organized with supplies she could identify from here. Flour, salt, dried beans, coffee, smoked meat. Everything labeled, everything ordered. There was one bed built into the corner, raised off the floor, covered with blankets. Clara looked at it and then looked at Caleb. "I expect you're hungry," he said without turning from the fire. "I can cook," she said. "If you tell me where things are." "You don't have to." "I want to be useful," she said. A pause. He turned then and looked at her across the warm, dim cabin, and she met his gaze directly, because she had always found that the best approach to uncertainty was to face it head-on. "The beans are on the 3rd shelf," he said. "Salt pork's in the box by the door. There's an onion and a half left 2nd shelf." "That'll do," she said. She found the pot. She found the water. She started to work. They cooked together, him doing the heavier tasks, without her having to ask her, managing the pot and the fire. And it was strange how little either of them needed to say to make the work go smoothly, as if they had some basic fluency in each other's rhythms that neither of them had known about. When the food was ready, they sat at the table. Clara ate. She had not realized until the first bite how hungry she was, properly, deeply hungry, the kind that settles into your bones and makes you slow and stupid. She had been giving Thomas most of her portions for 3 weeks. She ate without speaking and without embarrassment, and when she looked up, Caleb was watching her with an expression she could not read. "When did you last eat?" he said. "Yesterday morning," she said. Something moved through his expression, something dark and quiet. "The supplies I sent your family," he said. "They'll last them through to April, maybe May if your stepmother's careful." Clara looked at him. "You knew," she said slowly. "Before my father came to you. You knew what kind of situation they were in." "I knew what kind of situation you were in," he said. Silence. "Why?" she said. "Why did you agree to any of it? If you wanted to help, you could have just sent the supplies. You didn't need—" She stopped. She was not sure she wanted to finish that sentence. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "I could have," he said, "but your father would have sold you to someone else, or left you to freeze when the food ran out. I know men like Elias Whitmore. I've known them all my life." He looked at the table. "I'm not what they say about me down in the valley. I'm not that. I'm not going to—" He stopped himself. "You have the bed. I'll sleep by the fire." "Mr. Caleb?" He looked up. "What do you want from me?" she said. "In plain terms. Because I've lived long enough with things not said plainly, and I don't have the energy for it anymore." He looked at her for a long time, long enough that she began to think he wasn't going to answer. "Nothing," he said finally. "I don't want anything from you, Clara." "That's not an answer people say unless they're lying." "It's the truth," he said. What I want. He paused with the air of someone choosing words with unusual care. I've lived up here alone for 11 years. I don't know how to be around people anymore. I'm not sure I ever did really. What I want is... He looked away from her at the fire. I want you to be safe, that's all. I want somebody to be safe. Clara sat with that for a long moment. She thought about her mother. She thought about you are worth more than you know. She thought about 40 minutes in a wagon and a man who had walked away without saying her name. All right, she said. Caleb looked back at her. All right, she said again more firmly, as if she was making a decision, and the decision was already made. I can work with that. That night, Clara Whitmore lay in a stranger's bed in a stranger's cabin on the side of a mountain in the middle of a Montana winter, listening to the wind try to get through walls that would not let it in. She stared at the ceiling. Somewhere by the fire, she could hear Caleb's breathing slow and even the sound of a man who knew how to rest, even in difficult places. She thought about everything she had lost. She thought about everything she still had. She was still breathing. She was warm. She was fed. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, no one was asking her to be smaller than she was. It wasn't freedom. She knew that. It wasn't safe, not completely. Not yet. She had learned too many times that safety was something you could not trust on short acquaintance. But it was something. It was a beginning. And Clara Whitmore, who had survived everything her life had thrown at her so far, by finding the beginning and holding on to it with both hands, closed her eyes. She slept. She woke up before he did. That surprised her, because she had expected after everything, after the wagon ride, and the cold, and the strange bed in the stranger's cabin, to sleep badly, to lie awake for hours, with her mind running in circles, the way it always did when her life was in upheaval. Instead, she had slept deeply, and without dreaming the kind of sleep that comes when a body has been held together by sheer willpower for too long, and finally, in some basic animal way, decides it is safe enough to let go. The fire had burned down to coals. Caleb was on the floor near the hearth, wrapped in a blanket, one arm folded under his head. He looked different asleep. Younger, maybe. Less like the thing the valley made of him in their stories, and more like an ordinary man who had worked too hard for too many years and was glad for a few hours of stillness. Clara sat up quietly. She found her boots. She put them on without making noise, crossed the cabin to the hearth, and built the fire back up from the coals, the same way she had done at home every morning for as long as she could remember. Then she found the coffee. By the time Caleb woke up, there was a fire burning and a pot on, and the smell of coffee, doing what coffee has always done, which is make a cold morning. Feel like it might be survivable after all. He sat up, looked at the fire, looked at the pot, looked at her. You didn't have to do that, he said. His voice was rough with sleep. I know, she said. I wanted to. He was quiet for a moment. Then he pushed himself to his feet, all 6 feet, and however many inches of him unfolding from the floor with a stiffness that told her sleeping on boards was not as comfortable for him as he had let on, and he said, There's a comb, second shelf left side, if you want it. It was such a small thing, such an ordinary, thoughtful, unremarkable small thing. Clara turned away before he could see her face do something embarrassing. Thank you, she said. He said. That was how the first full day began. She had half expected a negotiation. Some conversation in which the terms of her presence were laid out, the duties assigned, the expectations made clear. She had been bracing for it since she woke up, had been running through possible responses to possible demands, had been reminding herself that she was capable and practical, and that whatever was asked of her, she could manage. She had always managed. Managing was what she did. But Caleb Rourke did not negotiate. He simply moved through his morning, the way he apparently always moved through his morning, checking the fire, checking the shutters, stepping outside briefly to assess the weather and the condition of the small outbuilding where he kept a mule and 2 goats, and when he came back inside, he stamped the snow from his boots and said, I've got traps to check on the north side. I'll be back by midday. All right, Clara said. There's enough wood stacked on the porch. You don't need to go out for it. All right. He looked at her for a second, like he was checking something. Then he nodded and pulled on his coat and went out. And Clara was alone in the cabin. She stood in the middle of it for a long moment, listening to the sound of silence, which in a Montana mountain winter is not actually silence at all, but a whole landscape of wind and creek, and the deep, patient settling of snow. Then she did what Clara always did when she was alone with a space she needed to understand. She explored it, not ransacking. She was too careful for that, too respectful of other people's belongings, even when those people were complicated, and she wasn't sure yet what they were to her. But a quiet, methodical cataloging of the place she was going to be living in, because understanding your environment was the first step to surviving it, and Clara Whitmore had been a survivor since before she knew the word for it. The cabin was a single room with a sleeping loft. She hadn't noticed the night before, accessed by a ladder along the back wall. She climbed up and found the loft empty, except for 2 wooden crates, both of which, when she opened them, contained what looked like a winter's worth of carefully dried herbs and remedies. Yarrow willow bark, dried mushrooms. A small sealed tin that smelled like pine pitch mixed with something else she couldn't identify. Medical supplies. The man had medical supplies that a frontier doctor would have been proud of. She climbed back down and kept looking. There were books. She hadn't noticed them the night before. They were on a shelf above the bed. 7 of them worn and much read, their spines cracked from opening and opening again. She tilted her head to read the titles. 2 were on animal husbandry. 1 was a collection of surveying maps for the Montana Territory. 1 was a Bible so old the cover was soft as cloth. 1 was a novel, Cooper's The Deer Slayer, which made her blink in surprise. And 2 were handwritten journals, their covers made from rough tanned leather. She did not open the journals. But she stood looking at that shelf for a long time. She was starting to understand something about Caleb Rourke. Whatever the valley said about him, whatever the whispers were, and wherever they had come from, the man who lived in this cabin was not a simple man. He was not a brutal man who had chosen brutality. He was a careful man. A man who planned and prepared and thought about the long term. A man who read for pleasure and kept medical herbs in the loft and labeled his supplies and slept on the floor so that a woman he barely knew could have the only comfortable bed. That did not mean he wasn't dangerous. Clara had met enough men to know that careful and dangerous were not mutually exclusive. But it meant that the danger, if it existed, was something more complicated than the valley's version of it. She was thinking about this when she heard it. A sound. Wrong. Not Caleb. His footsteps were heavy, and she'd already learned the rhythm of them, that deliberate, unhurried wait. This was lighter. Multiple sets of feet. And a voice, distant but distinct, carrying across the snow in the way that voices do in cold air. Hello, the cabin. Clara went still. She crossed to the small window, the one that looked out toward the trail, and looked out. 3 men. She did not recognize them. They were not from her settlement. She knew everyone from her settlement by sight. These men were rougher, older, wearing the kind of worn-out clothes that suggested they had been out in the mountains longer than they had planned. The one in front was heavy-set with a red beard, and he was looking at the cabin with an expression that Clara did not like. Hello, the cabin, he called again. Rourke, you in there? Clara looked at the door. There was a rifle mounted above it. She had noticed it last night. A Winchester, well-maintained, with a box of shells on the shelf beside it that was full. She thought about Caleb saying, "You don't have to be afraid of me." She had told him she wasn't. She was beginning to feel, looking at those 3 men through the small window, that she might need to get more specific about what she wasn't afraid of. The door. She went to it. Put her hand on the latch. "Don't open it," said the voice in her head that had always sounded like her mother. "Don't open it, Clara." "Is Rourke in there?" Redbeard called. His voice was louder now, and she could hear something in it that she had learned to identify in men who thought they had a right to whatever they found. "Come on, we can see smoke. Somebody's home." She did not open the door. Instead, she said through the door, in the steadiest voice she could produce, "Mr. Rourke is not available. What's your business?" A pause. Then a sound that might have been a laugh. "Well now," Redbeard said, "Rourke's got himself a woman." Another voice, younger, higher, with an edge of something that might have been excitement or might have been cruelty. Didn't know old Rourke was the type. Clara took the rifle down from above the door. She had fired a rifle before. Not well and not recently, but she knew the basics. Her father had made sure of that at least before he decided she was worth more as a commodity than as a person. She checked the chamber. Loaded. "Ma'am," Redbeard said, and he had moved closer. She could hear it, could hear the snow compressing under his boots. "We just need to water our horses and maybe rest up a while. That's all. No harm intended." "There's a creek a quarter-mile east," Clara said. "Your horses can water there." "Now that ain't very neighborly." "No," Clara agreed. "It isn't, but I reckon that's how it's going to be." Silence. She gripped the rifle and waited and listened, and did not breathe more than she had to. Then, from somewhere further down the trail, she heard a sound that rearranged the entire situation in the span of 1 second. Hoofbeats, heavy and fast, coming up the mountain trail at a pace that was too urgent for casual travel. Then Caleb's voice. "Yates." Just that. One word, one name, flat as a stone dropped on ice. She heard the change in the men outside, heard it before she saw it. Heard the sudden careful quality of the silence, the way people go still when something they might have underestimated turns out to be bigger than they thought. "Rourke," Redbeard said. Yates. His name was Yates. The friendliness was entirely gone from his voice now. "Didn't know you had company." "Now you do," Caleb said. "Right on." "We're just looking for—" "I know what you're looking for," Caleb said, and there was something in his voice that Clara had not heard from him before, something very quiet and very certain, and just barely covering something that had iron in it. "And you won't find it here. Right on, Yates. I won't say it a third time." A long pause. Then the sound of horses moving, going away. Clara let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like several minutes. She put the rifle carefully back in her hands that were shaking. She noticed now that the immediate need for them to be steady had passed. The door opened. Caleb came in. He looked at her. He looked at the rifle in her hands. Something moved across his face, not surprise exactly. More like the expression of a man who has made a calculation and found that it came out better than he expected. "They're gone," he said. "I know," she said. "I heard." "You took down the rifle?" "Yes." "Have you fired one before?" "Some," she said. Same answer as the horse. Something that was not quite a smile closer than last night, but still not quite moved through his expression. "Yates is a trapper," he said. "He comes through this territory twice a year. He's not an honest man, but he's a coward underneath it." He crossed to the fire. "You all right?" "I'm fine," Clara said. He looked at her. "My hands are shaking a little," she amended. "But I'm fine." He nodded. "That's sensible," he said. "Your hands are supposed to shake after something like that. It means you were paying attention." She stared at him. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "It's just that nobody's ever told me my hands shaking was a good sign before." He considered that for a moment. Then he said, "Sit down. I'll make something hot." And he did. He made it without fuss and without ceremony, heating water and adding dried herbs from the loft that turned it into something that was not quite tea, but was warming in a way that went deeper than temperature. He put a mug in her hands and sat across from her at the table and said nothing. And Clara drank and felt the shaking in her hands subside, and somewhere in the middle of that ordinary warmth, she thought, "This is a strange situation I am in," and the thought almost made her laugh, which surprised her because she had not expected to find anything to almost laugh about for a very long time. "Who are you?" she said. He looked up. "I mean—" She wrapped both hands around the mug. "Down in the valley they tell stories. I'd rather hear yours." He was quiet. "You don't have to," she said. "I'm not asking for any debt. I just—" She looked up at the table. "I'd like to know who's sitting across from me." The fire crackled. The wind leaned against the cabin. Outside, the snow that had been threatening since morning finally committed to falling in earnest, and the light through the small window went softer, more diffuse the particular quality of winter light when the sky is full. I grew up in Missouri, Caleb said. She looked up. His voice was quiet, not reluctant, just slow, the voice of a man who chose each word deliberately because he had learned not to waste them. My father was a farmer, good man mostly, hard when he needed to be, which was often because farming in Missouri in those years was not a business for the soft. He turned his mug on the table. I had a brother, older by 4 years. Name was Daniel. Past tense. Clara registered it and did not say anything. He was the kind of person that people loved easily, Caleb said. I was never that kind. I was always too big, too quiet, too much. People didn't know what to do with me. Daniel knew. Daniel always knew. He paused. He died of fever when I was 19. Left a wife and a daughter. The daughter was 2 years old. I'm sorry, Clara said. He nodded, accepting the condolence without deflecting it, which was something she noticed. After Daniel died, I stayed on to help his wife Margaret. Helped with the farm with the baby. Her name was Lily. Good name. She was a good kid. He looked at the fire. There was a man in our county who owned a dog that he kept for fighting. Mean dog. Kept him mean on purpose. Treated him badly on purpose. The whole county knew about it, and nobody said anything because the man was wealthy enough that nobody wanted the trouble. Clara felt the story shift. Felt where it was going. One day Lily was in the yard, Caleb said. She was 4 by then. The man's dog got loose and got into the yard, and I was there and He stopped. His jaw tightened. I put the dog down. I didn't have a choice. Lily was 4 years old, and I had about half a second to decide, so I decided. What happened? Clara said quietly. The man pressed charges. His voice was entirely even. Said I'd destroyed his property. Said I'd acted without cause. He had money, and I had... He looked at the table. I had the truth, which turned out not to be worth much. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't go to prison. Daniel's wife Margaret, she sold the farm and used the money for the legal costs, which I didn't know about until afterward, and by then it was too late to stop it. She lost the farm. He shook his head slowly. When it was over, I left. Couldn't stay. Couldn't look at what I'd cost them. His voice dropped. Came north. Came here. Figured if people were going to tell stories about me either way, at least up here I wasn't costing anyone I cared about anything. Silence. The fire settled. Clara sat with what he'd told her and turned it over carefully the way she turned everything over carefully, because she had learned that the first layer was never the whole story. So you saved a child, she said. I destroyed a man's property and cost my sister-in-law her home. You saved a 4-year-old girl from a fighting dog, Clara said. And then you were punished for it. And the people who told stories about you left out the part that made them uncomfortable because that's what people do. She looked at him steadily. And you've been up here ever since believing the version they tell. Something happened in Caleb Rourke's face. Not a collapse. Not a dramatic breaking open. More like something behind his eyes that had been braced against a door for a very long time suddenly shifted its weight. I cost them, he said. Yes, Clara said. And you saved Lily. Both of those things are true. You don't get to only keep the one that punishes you. He looked at her. She looked back. Where did you come from? He said, and it was not really a question. Montana Territory, she said. Same as you now. Something cracked then, not loudly, not with any drama, just a quiet fundamental release, like the first ice breaking on a river in early spring. And Caleb Rourke, the feared mountain man, the monster of the valley's stories, the man who had come back from 11 years of self-imposed exile, long enough to walk into a trading post and see a young woman being traded away. Like freight, he looked across the table at Clara Whitmore and said nothing at all. He didn't need to. She already understood. The days that followed had a shape she hadn't expected. She had expected friction. She had expected the constant low-level negotiation of two strangers learning to share a space, the stepping around each other, the misread signals, the accumulated small irritations of different habits and different rhythms. Instead, there was something quieter and stranger. Compatibility. Not warmth, not yet. Not exactly, but a practical, unpretentious compatibility that Clara recognized from the few truly functional partnerships she had observed in her life. They moved around each other in the small cabin without collision. They divided tasks without discussing them. He did the outside work, the traps, the livestock, the wood, and she managed the interior, but the division was fluid, organic, neither of them precious about it. When she started coughing on the third day, a dry, rasping cough that she recognized as the beginning of the chest cold, she always got when she went too long without proper nutrition. In cold weather, he went to the loft and came back with willow bark tea without being asked. She drank it without arguing. "You knew about this," she said, watching him put the remaining bark back on its shelf. "About what?" "About how to do all this." She gestured vaguely at the loft, the organized shelves, the herbs, the remedies, the supplies. This isn't just a man who went into the wilderness to be alone. This is a man who planned to be alone for a long time. He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't plan to be alone forever," he said, "but you planned for it. There's a difference between planning for something and wanting it." She thought about that for a moment. "When I was 14, she said, my mother died and my father fell apart. And I planned for that. I planned for every bad thing that could happen because planning was the only thing I could control." She looked at her hands. "But I didn't want to be needed. I just wanted to be—" She stopped. "What?" he said. "Seen," she said. "I just wanted somebody to see me." Caleb set the mug down on the table in front of her. He didn't say anything, but he looked at her. Really looked at her. Not at the coat, or the patched dress, or the practical usefulness of her hands. At her. The way her mother used to look at her, the way that made her feel like all of her was present and accounted for nothing, missing, nothing unwanted. She looked away first. She picked up the mug and drank. "The mule," she said. "What's her name?" "She doesn't have one." Clara looked at him. "She's a mule," he said a bit defensively. "That mule has been living with you for however long, and you haven't given her a name." She knows when I'm talking to her." "That's not the same thing." A long pause. "What would you call her?" he said. Clara thought about it seriously, because Clara took most things seriously, and names in particular. "Agnes," she said. "She looks like an Agnes." Something shifted in his face. Definitely the ghost of a smile this time. More substantial than before. "Agnes," he said, trying it out. "Agnes," she confirmed. The next morning, when he went out to check on the livestock, she heard him through the cabin wall. Say, "Morning, Agnes." She pressed her lips together and concentrated very hard on stirring the oatmeal. On the seventh day, she found the drawings. They were tucked behind one of the crates in the loft. Not hidden exactly, but not displayed, just stored the way people store things they're not sure what to do with. A sheaf of papers folded carefully that when she opened them turned out to be pen and ink drawings of animals. A fox in careful detail, every hair suggested with cross-hatching. A hawk in mid-flight. 3 deer in different poses moving through a space that she recognized after a moment as the tree line just east of the cabin. She climbed down from the loft with them in her hands. Caleb was at the table sharpening a knife. He looked up. He saw what was in her hands. Something crossed his face, a quick involuntary thing gone, almost before she could read it. But she had always been good at reading the things people tried to hide. Self-consciousness. Again. "I wasn't prying," she said. "I was reorganizing the second crate, and they fell out of the first one." "It's fine," he said. Too quickly. She looked down at the drawings again. At the hawk in flight. At the precision of the wing feathers, the tilt of the head. "Caleb," she said. He kept sharpening the knife. "Caleb, these are extraordinary." He stopped. She looked up. I was looking at her with an expression that was so defenseless, so open, so completely unguarded, that for a moment she forgot herself entirely, forgot the cabin and the mountain and the whole complicated situation she was living in, and just looked at a man who had been alone so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to have someone look at something he'd made and mean it. "They're just," he started. "Don't," she said. "Don't say, 'They're just something I do.' Don't say, 'It's nothing.' They're not nothing. This," She held up the hawk. This is real. You've been watching this bird for a long time to draw it like this. A pause. Red-tailed hawk, he said quietly. She's nested in the spruce above the creek for 3 years. I can see her from the trapline. What's her name? Clara said. He blinked. Then something happened that she had not seen yet in 8 days of living in the same cabin as this man. Caleb Rourke laughed. It was short and surprised, and a little rusty, as if it hadn't been used in a while, but it was entirely real, and it transformed his face in a way that made Clara's chest do something she chose not to examine too closely. She doesn't have a name, he said. She's a hawk. Caleb, Clara said patiently. Agnes the mule. He looked at her. Eleanor, he said. The hawk is Eleanor. Eleanor, he confirmed with the air of a man who was making a significant concession. Good, she said. She folded the drawings carefully and held them out to him. He took them. His fingers brushed hers in the exchange, not intentionally. Just the ordinary contact of two people passing something between them, and neither of them said anything about it, but she was aware of it long after she had gone back to the cooking fire and he had gone back to his knife. On the 11th day, the storm got serious. Not the casual, persistent snowfall that had been going on since she arrived, something different. Something with intention. The wind picked up in the night, and by morning it was throwing itself against the cabin walls with a regularity that sounded almost like someone knocking. Caleb came in from checking the livestock with his beard frosted and his expression more focused than she had seen it. Bad one coming, he said. How bad? Bad enough that we stay in. He pulled off his ice-crusted coat. I've got Agnes and the goats sorted. Fire needs to stay up. I'll manage the fire, she said. What else? He looked at her. You don't need to manage anything. This is just a storm. I know it's just a storm. I've been through storms. I asked what else needs doing. A pause. The shutters on the east side need an extra pin, he said. I was going to do it. I'll do it, she said, reaching for her coat. Clara, Caleb. She looked at him directly. I am not a guest here. I'm not being kept. I live here. Let me act like it. Silence. Something in him settled. The extra pins are in the box beside the door, he said. The east shutter is the one with the leather hinge leftmost. Watch the ice on the porch. She watched the ice on the porch. She came back in with cold reddened hands and pine pitch on her sleeve and the east shutter properly secured, and Caleb looked at her, the way he was beginning to look at her with some regularity, with an expression that was too complicated for a single name, but that she was slowly learning to read, and said nothing. They spent that day inside. It was the closest quarters they had occupied since the night she arrived. The storm pressing them inward, the world outside becoming nothing but sound and fury that had no meaning for them, and Clara discovered something. She was not uncomfortable. She had expected to feel it, the claustrophobia of small spaces, the tension of proximity with someone she was still learning, the awareness of all the things unsaid and undefined between them. She had spent years in close quarters with her family, and always felt. It always felt the walls of the homestead as a kind of pressure. Not here. Here the small space felt. She searched for the word, turning it over, testing it. Safe. She was sitting near the fire with one of Caleb's books open in her lap, The Deerslayer, which was better than she'd expected, when he looked up from the piece of leatherwork he'd been doing, and said, You read. My mother taught me, she said. Same Bible she learned from. Good book to learn from. Better than most. She turned a page. Your copies are well read. Winter's long up here. Is that the only reason? She looked up. Or did you bring them on purpose? A pause. On purpose, he said. What else did you bring on purpose when you came up here? He thought about it seriously, which she had learned was how he approached most questions, not deflecting or reducing, but actually considering. The medical books, he said. In case I needed them, and in case somebody else did. The journals, I'd never kept one before, but I thought if I was going to be alone, I should have something to talk to. He paused. The novel. Why Deerslayer specifically? Daniel gave it to me, he said. Week before he got sick. Clara held very still. "Oh," she said softly. "He said Natty Bumppo was a good kind of man. Simple but not stupid. Strong but not cruel." Caleb looked at the leather in his hands. "He said I reminded him of him." The storm howled against the walls. Clara looked at the book in her hands. She thought about a dead man who had given his brother a novel and described him as good. She thought about all the ways a person can be seen clearly by the people who love them and not see themselves that way at all. "Daniel was right," she said. Caleb looked up. "That's the kind of man you are," Clara said. "Simple, but not stupid. Strong, but not cruel." She met his gaze. "You should believe him. He knew you." The storm pressed in. The fire answered it. And Caleb Rourke, who had been living alone with a dead man's novel, and the valley's stories, and his own relentless accounting of what he had cost the people he loved, looked at Clara Whitmore across the small warm room and for the first time in 11 years allowed himself to consider the possibility that what he knew about himself might not be the whole story. That night, when the storm reached its peak and the wind was loud enough to make conversation difficult, they sat on opposite sides of the fire and didn't talk and didn't need to, and Clara read, and Caleb worked on the leather project she had realized was turning into a pair of boots her size, she had noticed, though she had not said so, and the fire was good, and the walls held, and the mountain did its worst, and they were still there when the morning came. She fell asleep in the chair. She woke up with a blanket she hadn't put there tucked carefully around her shoulders. Caleb was asleep on the floor near the door, his back to the room. Clara looked at the blanket. She looked at his sleeping form. She breathed in slowly and breathed out slowly and told herself very firmly that she was in a complicated and uncertain situation, and that what she was feeling was gratitude and safety, and that those things were valuable and worth protecting and should not be confused with anything else. She almost believed it. The boots fit perfectly. She discovered this on the morning of the 14th day, when she came back from the outhouse to find them sitting beside the fire, finished set neatly on the hearth, as if they had always been there. No note. No announcement. Caleb was already outside. The boots were simply there, dark leather carefully stitched, lined with something soft that she recognized after a moment as rabbit fur. She picked one up, turned it over, examined the stitching along the sole tight, and even the work of someone who had done this many times and taken care with it every single time. Then she sat down on the floor right there in front of the fire and put them on. They fit like they had been made for her feet specifically, because they had. She sat for a moment and did not say anything to the empty cabin. She did not cry, but it was closer than she had come since the morning her father walked out of Hadley's trading post without looking back, and she sat with it and breathed through it. And when Caleb came back inside 20 minutes later, stamping snow from his boots, she was standing at the cooking fire stirring oatmeal, and the only evidence of anything was that she was wearing new boots. He looked at them. Then he looked at the oatmeal like it was very interesting. "They fit," she said. "Good," he said. "Caleb." He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, crossed to the fire, poured coffee. The subject was closed. But something was not closed. Something had opened actually quietly and without fanfare, and Clara was aware of it, the way you're aware of a window in a room that someone has cracked open on the first warm day of spring. Not dramatically, not all at once, just the faint new presence of outside air where there had only been inside air before. She had stopped counting the days after the 14th, not because she had lost track of them, but because counting had been a habit born of the belief that this situation was temporary, that there was somewhere else she was supposed to be getting back to some other life, waiting on the other side of winter. The longer she lived in the cabin, the more that belief softened and blurred at the edges. And eventually she stopped counting, because counting implied a before and an after, and she was finding it harder to locate the dividing line. What she knew for certain was that February came, and with it a stretch of brutal cold that made every previous hardship look like inconvenience, and they managed it together without either of them falling apart. She taught herself to use his skinning knife properly because she could see it needed doing, and because practical competence was the thing she had always been able to fall back on when everything else was uncertain. He watched her the first time without commenting, and the second time said only, "Angle's better." After the third time, he handed her the knife without being asked, and went back to whatever he was doing, which was the closest thing to a formal endorsement she suspected he was capable of. She started reading to him in the evenings. This had begun accidentally. She had been reading The Deerslayer aloud to herself, because she had always processed things better when she said them out loud, a habit her mother had given her, and she had not realized Caleb had come in from outside until she looked up and found him sitting on the floor near the fire with his eyes closed, and his expression the most relaxed she had ever seen it. She stopped. "Don't stop," he said without opening his eyes. She kept reading. After that, it was simply something they did in the evenings. She read, and he listened, and occasionally he said something about what she had read, not long speeches, not literary analysis, but a single observation, usually precise and often surprising, that told her he was following the story with the same close attention he gave to everything. "He makes the wrong choice there," he said one evening, when Natty Bumppo made a decision that led inevitably to disaster. "But the right one for who he is," Clara said. Caleb was quiet. "Maybe those are the same thing," he said. She looked at him over the book. He was looking at the fire. She did not push it, but she thought about it for a long time after. It was in the middle of the third week that Thomas arrived. She did not know he was coming. There was no warning, just the sound of hoofbeats on the trail below, and then a voice she recognized even muffled by distance and cold, and the cabin walls calling her name, and she was on her feet and at the door before she had consciously decided to move. Thomas had ridden up alone on their neighbor's old brown horse, 8 years old, and bundled into 3 coats, and so cold, his lips were almost blue, and when she got the door open and saw him standing at the bottom of the porch steps, he looked up at her with her mother's eyes and said, "Clara, I've been riding since before sunrise." She was down the steps and had him in her arms in the time it took to breathe. "Thomas, Thomas, what are you doing? You rode up here alone." "In this weather, does Papa know where you—" "Papa sent me," he said. His voice was muffled against her coat. "Stepmother's sick, real sick. The kind of sick that—" He pulled back. He was trying very hard to be 8 years old and not cry, which Clara recognized because she had spent a great deal of her own life trying very hard not to cry. "Papa says he needs the doctor from Benton Creek, but we don't have the money, and he didn't know who else to—" He stopped. He had seen Caleb. Caleb was standing in the doorway of the cabin taking up most of it, which was simply a physical fact about Caleb and the doorway, and not something he did intentionally, but which nonetheless had a significant effect on an 8-year-old who had grown up on Valley stories about the man. Thomas pressed slightly closer to Clara. "Thomas," Clara said, putting her hand on his shoulder. "This is Caleb. He's—" She paused for only a second. "He's a good man. You don't need to be afraid." Thomas looked up at Caleb with the exhausted measuring gaze of a child who is too tired and too frightened to pretend. "Are you the monster from the mountain?" Thomas said. Caleb looked at him steadily. "That's what they call me," he said. "Clara says you're good." "Clara's generally right about things," Caleb said. Thomas looked at his sister. She looked back at him with the expression she had always used on him, the one that meant, "I promise, and I don't promise things I don't mean." Thomas looked back at Caleb. "Our stepmother is sick," he said. "We need the doctor, but we don't have money. Papa—" He swallowed. "Papa cried this morning. I never saw him cry before." Something moved through Clara's chest. It was not simple. It was not forgiveness. She was not there yet. She didn't know if she would ever be fully there, but it was something adjacent to it, something that recognized that a man who had done a terrible thing could also be a man who loved his son and was frightened and was out of choices. She looked at Caleb. He was already moving. "Get him inside," he said. "Get him warm. I'll saddle Agnes." Clara blinked. "You're going to Benton Creek yourself?" "The doctor's name is Aldrich," Caleb said, pulling his coat from the hook. "I know him. He'll come if I ask." "Caleb, that's 3 hours in this weather." "Then I'd better start now." He paused with his coat half on and looked at her directly. "Stay here. Keep Thomas warm. There's rabbit stew left from yesterday. If I'm not back by nightfall, the rifle is above the door, and you know how to use it." "I know," she said. "I'll be back before nightfall." "I know," she said again. And she did know in the way she was learning to know things about Caleb Rourke, not because he had given her reasons, but because he was the kind of man who said what he meant and meant what he said, and he had said he would be back. He was back before nightfall. He brought Dr. Aldrich, who was a small, sharp-eyed man of about 60, who looked at Caleb with the fond exasperation of someone who has known a person for a long time, and not always agreed with them, and looked at Clara with polite assessment, and said to Thomas, "Let's get you home, son." Thomas grabbed Clara's hand before he left. "Come back with us," he said. Clara looked at him. "Clara, come home." She crouched down so she was level with him. She thought about the homestead, about Ruth's cold regard and her father's capacity for the self-serving choice, about the life she had been living there, useful, capable, entirely disposable. Then she thought about boots that had been made to fit her feet, about a hawk named Eleanor and a mule named Agnes, and a man who had said, "I want somebody to be safe," and meant it about her. "I am home," she said gently. "This is where I live now, Thomas, but I'm not far. I'm right up the mountain, and I'll always—" Her voice did something she didn't intend. She pressed on. "I'll always be your Clara. Nothing changes that. You understand?" Thomas's chin trembled. He nodded. She hugged him again hard, and then she let him go, and she stood and watched Dr. Aldrich lead him back down the trail on the neighbor's horse with Caleb riding beside them, a dark shape against the white-gray evening, and she stayed on the porch until they were gone. Then she went inside. She stood in the middle of the cabin and the quiet, and she pressed her hands flat against the table and breathed in and breathed out, and worked through what she was feeling, which was too many things at once to name separately. She had just told her 8-year-old brother that she was home. And the terrifying thing, the thing that sat in the center of her chest, like a coal that was still warm, was that she had not been lying. Caleb came back 3 hours later. He was cold straight through and said nothing about the ride other than a brief confirmation that Thomas had made it home safely, and that Dr. Aldrich was confident about Ruth's illness being treatable. Clara made him sit by the fire and put hot coffee in his hands, and he let her do both without arguing, which told her more about how the ride had cost him than any words would have. "Thank you," she said. "You already said that today," he said. "For different reasons," she said. "This is a new thank you." He looked at the fire, drank his coffee. His hands were wrapped around the mug, and she could see the rawness of them from the cold, the skin over his knuckles dry and cracked. Without thinking about it, she went to the loft and came back with the pine pitch tin she had noticed on her first day, the one she had identified by smell. She sat across from him and held out her hand. He looked at it. "For the hands," she said. A pause. He put one hand in hers. She was careful. She worked the salve into the cracked skin over his knuckles, and he sat completely still, and the fire was warm, and outside the mountain did what it always did, which was endure, and neither of them said anything for a long time. "Why did you really go?" she said. Not accusingly, genuinely. He looked at their hands. "Thomas came for you," he said. "He came for help," Clara said. "You could have just told him where to find the doctor. You didn't have to ride 3 hours in February weather to vouch for him personally." Silence. "Aldrich doesn't do credit," Caleb said. "He needs money up front, and your family doesn't have it." "You paid for it," Clara said. Not a question. He said nothing. "Caleb." "It's not charity," he said a bit roughly. "Consider it. Don't say an advance on anything," she said. "Don't make it transactional. Just tell me why." He looked at her. "Because he's your brother," he said. "And you stayed." The simplest things she was learning were always the ones that broke through. She finished with the salve, and folded his hand closed, and released it, and reached for the other one, and he let her. And she worked in silence, and he watched her. And the fire crackled, and she was almost through when he said very quietly, "You're not going to ask what it cost." "No," she said. "Why not?" She looked up at him. "Because you didn't ask what it cost me," she said, "to let Thomas go back down that mountain without me." His jaw tightened. He looked away. She finished with his hands and put the lid back on the tin and stood up and set it on the shelf. "I'm going to read tonight," she said, "if you want to listen." "Yes," he said, immediately, which was unusual for a man who generally took time with his answers. She got the book. They did not talk about what had happened for the rest of that evening. But something had shifted between them. Some weight redistributed, some accounting brought into balance, and when she fell asleep in the chair again, she kept doing this. The chair was simply more comfortable than she gave it credit for, and the fire was warm, and she was always tired by evening. She was not aware of the moment when Caleb got up and put a blanket around her shoulders. She was only aware of it in the morning. She was always only aware of it in the morning. March came in like a bully and left like a reasonable person, which was how March worked in the Montana mountains. A fact, Caleb told her with the matter-of-fact authority of someone who had watched it happen 11 times. With March came mud and noise, and the particular violent beauty of a mountain shaking winter off its back, and with it came something else. Visitors. The first was a trapper named Hollis, who appeared one morning leading 2 mules and carrying a beaver pelt over each shoulder, and who greeted Caleb with the ease of old acquaintance, and looked at Clara with openly curious eyes and said, "Caleb, you got yourself a situation." "Morning, Hollis," Caleb said. "That's not a denial. It's not a discussion either." Hollis looked at Clara with the frankness of a man who had spent enough years in the wilderness that social niceties had worn away entirely. "You the Whitmore girl," he said. Clara met his gaze directly. "I'm Clara Whitmore, yes." "Heard about what your father did." "Most people have," she said. "How you finding it up here?" She considered him. He was asking with what appeared to be genuine curiosity rather than prurient interest, which she appreciated. "Better than I expected," she said. "And I expected some things to be all right." Hollis looked at him with an expression that said very clearly that the conversation was over. Hollis stayed for lunch, ate 2 bowls of Clara's bean stew, told a story about a grizzly encounter that was probably 60% accurate, and left with a promise to bring news from the valley next time he passed through. "Old friend?" Clara asked when the sound of his mules had faded. "Known him 12 years, Caleb said. "He talks too much." "He seems kind." "He is kind. He still talks too much." Clara smiled. Not the careful, controlled expression she had kept in place for most of her life. The one she had used to smooth over tension at the homestead, to reassure Thomas, to project competence in situations that frightened her. A real smile. The kind that happened before she could decide about it. Caleb saw it. She watched him see. It watched the way his face did the thing it did, that complicated layered thing she was still learning the names for, and she thought not for the first time, and with increasing lack of surprise, that she was in considerable trouble. The second visitor was less pleasant. A week after Hollis. A man came up the trail on a pale horse alone, wearing a coat that was too fine for a working man, and an expression that Clara recognized instantly, and from a distance, the expression of someone who had come to take something. She was outside near the woodpile when she saw him coming. She stood and watched, and did not go inside for the rifle, not yet, because she wanted to see what he did before she decided what she was going to do. He stopped his horse at the edge of the yard. He looked at her. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "That's me," she said. "My name is Garrett. I'm an associate of your father's." He smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "He sent me to check on your welfare. Make sure you're being treated acceptably." Clara looked at him. She thought about the word welfare. She thought about the word associate. She thought about the fact that her father had never in 23 years sent anyone anywhere to check on her welfare. "How kind of him," she said. "He's concerned," Garrett said. "A young woman living alone up here with a man of Rourke's reputation." "I'm not living alone," Clara said. "I'm living with Caleb." Something shifted in Garrett's expression. "Your father would like you to come home," he said. "He believes the arrangement was premature. He's found a more suitable situation for you." Clara went very still. "A more suitable situation," she said. "A respectable household. In Benton Creek. A widower established who would be willing to take you on as—" "Stop," Clara said. He stopped. She was not shouting. She was not shaking. Her hands, she noticed distantly, were completely steady. "My father traded me once," she said. "He does not get to trade me again." "Miss Whitmore, I'm not sure you understand your position." "I understand it perfectly," Clara said. "Better than I did 3 months ago, actually. My position is that I am a grown woman standing on her own property, and you are a man my father sent because he believes he still has authority over me, and he does not." She looked at him. "You can tell him I said so." Garrett's expression shifted into something harder. "Rourke, has he started?" "I make my own decisions," Clara said. "Not Caleb's, mine. I don't belong to my father, and I don't belong to Caleb, and I don't belong to your widower in Benton Creek. I belong to myself." She took one step forward. "Now I'd like you to leave." A long pause. Then from the direction of the cabin, Caleb's voice very quiet. "You heard her." She hadn't heard him come out. She didn't look back at him, but she felt his presence at her back, not between her and Garrett, not shielding her, but behind her. Solid. Available. Like the wall of a well-built cabin. Garrett looked from Clara to Caleb and back to Clara. Something in his face recalculated. "Your father won't be pleased," he said. "That's not new information," Clara said. "He left." She stood and watched his horse pick its way back down the trail until it disappeared, and then she let out a breath and turned around. Caleb was standing 5 feet behind her. His face was doing the complicated thing. "You didn't need me," he said. "No," she agreed. "But I'm glad you were there." He looked at her for a long moment. "A more suitable situation," he said. It was not really a question. "Apparently my father has found me a widower in Benton Creek." "Ah," he said. "I'm not going," she said. "I know," he said. "I just wanted to say it out loud," she said. "So it was clear." "It's clear," he said. A pause. "It's very clear," he said, and there was something in his voice, something very carefully contained, that made Clara decide to look at the woodpile for a moment. "I should bring in wood," she said. "I'll get it," he said. "I can—" "Clara," he said. She looked at him. "Let me do something," he said very quietly, with an intensity that was entirely disproportionate to the task of carrying firewood, and entirely proportionate to whatever was actually happening between them in this moment. "Please." She stepped back. He picked up the wood. She went inside. She stood by the fire for a long time after pressing her cool hands to her warm face, and had a very firm conversation with herself about the nature of gratitude and the difference between feeling safe with someone and feeling something else. And the conversation was largely unconvincing. That night, she could not sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of the mountain settling and the fire dying down, and Caleb's quiet breathing from the floor, and she thought about everything she had said to Garrett, and she thought about how she had meant every word of it. "I belong to myself." She had never said that out loud before today. She had never believed it with enough certainty to say it. She lay in the dark, and she turned it over and over. This new belief, testing it, the way you test ice, you're about to walk across looking for the places where it might be thin. It held. She was thinking about this when she heard it. The sound that was wrong. Not the wind. Not the cabin settling. Something outside on the south side, moving in the way that things don't move at 3 in the morning when an honest person has no business being there. She sat up. "Caleb," she said, quiet. I was awake instantly, which told her he had not been deeply asleep. She heard the small sounds of him rising from the floor. "I heard it," he said. She reached for her boots, the new ones, and put them on in the dark. She heard Caleb moving toward the door, heard the rifle come down from above it. "Stay back from the window," he said. "I'm not going to stand in front of the window," she said, which was not the same as staying back from it, and she moved to the edge of it and looked out into the dark. A shape. Moving near the outbuilding. "Someone's near Agnes," she said. Caleb said something under his breath that she chose not to hear precisely. "How many?" he said. She watched. "One," she said. "Maybe 2. Hard to tell." He opened the door. "Caleb," she said. He looked back at her over his shoulder, one hand on the door-frame rifle in the other, and in the darkness. With the dying firelight behind her, she could not see his expression clearly, but she could feel the weight of it. "I'll be right back," he said. "You'd better be," she said. He went out. She stood at the edge of the window and watched and listened, and the mountain was vast and dark around the small pool of light from the cabin. And she was afraid, actually afraid in a way she had not been, even when Yates and his men had come to the door, because that time had been about her, and this time was about him. She heard his voice low and authoritative from the direction of the outbuilding. Then other voices, two of them, both defensive, both with the particular quality of men who have been caught doing something they cannot justify. Then quiet. Then footsteps coming back. Caleb opened the cabin door and came in and said, "Two boys from the valley. Heard rumors about my fur stores. Thought they'd help themselves." "Are they gone?" "They're gone." "What did you tell them?" He set the rifle back above the door. "I told them," he said with the absolute evenness of a man who had never needed to shout to be frightening, "that the next time someone came to this property uninvited in the dark, there would be no conversation." Clara looked at him. He looked at her. They were standing in the middle of the cabin, and the fire was almost out, and the night was outside in all directions, and she was suddenly and completely aware of how small the world had gotten in the last 3 months, and how the smallness of it had come to feel like the opposite of imprisonment. "You're shaking," he said. "I know," she said. "I told you before. It means I was paying attention." Something cracked open in his face, not the ghost of a smile, an actual one, full and unguarded and brief as lightning and completely transforming, and she saw in it the shape of the man Daniel Rourke had known and given a novel to and called good. And she understood with sudden and total clarity that she was in love with Caleb Rourke, and had been for some time now, without properly admitting it to herself. She sat down, on the floor right there, because her legs suggested it. "Clara," he said, concerned, now dropping down in front of her. "Are you all right?" "Completely fine," she said. "Perfectly fine. Give me a moment." He crouched in front of her, close his face level with hers, one hand hovering near her arm, in the way of a man who wanted to make contact and was asking permission with the gesture alone. She looked at him, in the dying firelight. With the mountain around them, and 3 months of a life she had not expected between them, and the whole uncertain, extraordinary future ahead of them, and his face full of a concern that was so uncomplicated and so complete that it hit her somewhere below all her careful defenses. She reached out and put her hand against his jaw. He went absolutely still. "I'm fine," she said softly. "I'm better than fine. I just needed to sit down for a second." He did not move. His eyes were dark and very steady looking at her. "Clara," he said. His voice had dropped to something she had to lean slightly toward to hear. "Caleb," she said back. A long moment. The fire crackled once low, and the cabin was warm, and the mountain was everywhere, and his face was 3 inches from hers, and neither of them moved. Then he said, "I don't know how to do this right." "Neither do I," she said. "I reckon we figure it out." He put his hand over hers, where it rested against his jaw, and held it there. Outside the mountain was silent. Inside the fire burned down to embers. Neither of them moved for a very long time. In the morning, neither of them mentioned it. Not because it hadn't happened. It had happened. It was real. It sat between them with the solid, undeniable weight of something true, but because they were both people who had learned through long experience that the most fragile things are the ones you grab at too quickly. So they moved through the morning, the way they always moved through the morning, with the practiced ease of two people who had learned each other's rhythms over 3 months of close living. And the only difference was the particular quality of the silence, which was warmer than it used to be and carried more in it. She made coffee. He checked the outbuilding to make sure Agnes was settled after the previous night's disturbance. He came back in and said, "She's fine, annoyed but fine." "That sounds like Agnes," Clara said. "She bit me," he said. "That also sounds like Agnes." He sat down at the table, and she put coffee in front of him, and their fingers did not quite touch, and both of them were aware of it, and neither of them said so. This was where they were. It was not a simple place to be. But it was honest, and honesty, Clara had decided some time ago, was worth more than comfort in the long run. She could live in an honest place. She had lived in comfortable lives for long enough to know the difference. What she had not anticipated was that the world outside the cabin had its own plans. 3 days after the night intruders, Hollis came back. He came faster than usual on a horse that had been pushed, and he was off before the horse had fully stopped, and he looked at Caleb with the expression of a man who is carrying bad news and has been carrying it long enough that he wants to put it down. "Rourke," he said. "We need to talk." Clara was on the porch. Hollis glanced at her. "She stays," Caleb said before Clara could speak. Hollis nodded. "Victor Hale's in the valley," he said. The name meant nothing to Clara. But she watched what it did to Caleb's face, and that told her everything she needed to know. It was not fear she was learning, that Caleb Rourke was not a man who experienced fear in the ordinary way, that whatever he had been through had rearranged his relationship with danger into something more like flat assessment. But it was serious. It was the face of a man updating his understanding of how dangerous his situation had just become. "What does Hale want?" Caleb said. "Word is he's buying up trap lines, paying good money for territory agreements, and not taking no gracefully when he gets it." Hollis looked at the ground, then back up. "And he's been asking questions. About you specifically. About your place up here. About your stores." "Hale always asks questions," Caleb said. "These ones had a different shape to them," Hollis said. "He asked about—" He stopped, glanced at Clara again. Something about the glance was careful. "He asked about what you had up here, and who." Clara understood. She felt the understanding move through her like cold water, clear and bracing. Victor Hale had heard the same valley story everyone had heard. Girl traded to the mountain man. Mountain man with 11 years of stored furs and supplies and territory that men like Victor Hale would want. And he had done the math that men like Victor Hale always did. "When?" Caleb said. "Few days, maybe a week," Hollis said. "He doesn't rush. That's the thing about Hale. He takes his time and he comes prepared." A pause. "He brought 4 men with him from Colorado. I recognize 2 of them. They're not—" Hollis chose his word carefully. "They're not for show." The air on the porch had changed. Clara straightened her spine. "Thank you, Hollis," she said. He looked at her. "For coming to tell us," she said. "I know the ride isn't easy." Hollis studied her for a moment with the same frank assessment he had used the first time they met. Then he nodded slowly with the air of a man revising an opinion upward. "Miss Whitmore," he said. There was something in his voice that had not been there before. Something like respect. "You're more than I expected." "Most people are," she said. Hollis left with a fresh horse from Caleb's small remuda and the promise to send word if Hale moved sooner than expected. Clara waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded. "Tell me about Hale," she said. "He's a territorial man," Caleb said. They had moved back inside. He was at the table but not sitting, standing, his hands flat on the surface, looking at the middle distance, the way he looked when he was thinking through something with his full attention. Was in Colorado territory for years. Made money on furs, and then more money on other men's furs when they couldn't protect their territory. There were claims filed against him twice. Nothing stuck. Because he bought his way out of it. Because the witnesses changed their minds, Caleb said with a flatness that made the meaning very clear. Clara sat across from him. "He's going to come here and try to buy your territory," she said. "He's going to come here and try to take it," Caleb said. "The buying part is what he does first because it's cleaner, but Hale doesn't accept no." "What do you want to do?" He looked at her. It struck her again how different that was. How instinctively and naturally he asked what she wanted, included her, treated this as a shared problem rather than his alone to manage. 3 months ago she had not known that men could do that. She had not known that a person could be in a difficult situation and have someone stand beside them instead of in front of them making decisions on their behalf. "I want to handle it without violence," he said. "That's always what I want. But Hale doesn't usually give you that option." "Then we prepare," Clara said. "Clara, Don't, she said. Don't tell me to go down the mountain. Don't tell me this isn't my fight. My name may not be on whatever territory agreement exists up here, but this is where I live, and I'm not leaving it because a man from Colorado has decided he wants it. She held his gaze. Tell me what we need to do. A long moment. The documents are in the loft, he said. Territorial claim papers, survey maps, everything that establishes my legal right to this land. Where in the loft? Bottom of the second crate, tied with cord. She was up the ladder before he finished the sentence. She found the papers. She brought them down and spread them on the table, and they spent the next 2 hours going through every document she reading, and he explaining. Because the legal language of territorial claims was a particular language, and she had always been good at languages when she had a reason to learn them. She was better at it than he expected. She could see him realizing this across the table, the slight shifts in his expression as she read aloud, and then summarized accurately, and then identified the gaps in the documentation that a man like Hale's lawyers might try to exploit. This one, she said, pointing. The eastern boundary. The survey mark references a creek that's moved since this was filed. It's been, 8 years? 9, he said, which means the mark is in the wrong place now. By about 40 feet. And in those 40 feet, is there anything Hale would want? Caleb was quiet for a moment. The best section of the trapline, he said. She looked at him. Right, she said. We need to have this resurveyed. I know a surveyor in Benton Creek. Honest man. But it takes time to... Can Hollis carry a message to him? Hollis will do what I ask. Then we send Hollis in the morning with a letter, Clara said. We need that resurvey documented and filed before Hale arrives. If it's already in the legal record, there's nothing for him to leverage. Caleb looked at her across the table. She looked back. What? She said. Nothing, he said. Caleb. I'm just... He stopped. I've been managing this land alone for 11 years, he said. Nobody's ever sat down and thought through the legal end of it with me. You've been alone for 11 years, she said. That doesn't mean alone was better. He looked at her for a long time. No, he said quietly. It doesn't. They wrote the letter to the surveyor that evening. Clara drafted it, and Caleb revised it, and the final version was better than either would have produced alone, which was something she was beginning to recognize as a pattern. Hollis left with it the next morning. Then they waited. Waiting was something Clara had extensive experience with. Waiting for harvests, waiting for weather, waiting for her father to come home from wherever he had gone, waiting for a life that was supposed to get better. She had always waited alone. Waiting with someone else was a different thing entirely. It had a different texture. She found herself teaching Caleb things she had not realized she knew, not deliberately. It happened the way things happened between them organically, without plan, like water finding its level. She had grown up in a family that barely survived. She knew how to make something from almost nothing. She knew that the inner bark of certain trees was edible in extremity, that pine needle tea prevented the particular weakness that came from not enough green food in winter, that a single egg stretched further in cornbread than you'd think if you knew how to handle the batter. He knew the land, and she knew the living, and together they made something neither had alone. My mother would have liked you, she said one afternoon without planning to. He looked up from the hinge he was repairing. She liked people who were real, Clara said. She had no patience for performance. She always said you could tell everything about a person by watching how they treated something that couldn't speak for itself. She thought about it. Animals, children, land. How did she treat them? He said. Carefully, Clara said. Like they mattered. Because she believed they did. A pause. She sounds like someone I would have been afraid to disappoint, he said. She was, Clara said. Everyone who knew her felt that. Not because she was hard on people. Because she saw them so clearly that you wanted to be the thing she saw. She turned her coffee mug in her hands. I've only ever felt that with one other person. She did not look at him when she said it. She didn't need to. The moment sat between them, warm and undemanding, the way the best moments were learning to be. It was on the 5th day after Hollis left that Victor Hale arrived. He came in the early afternoon on a gray horse with 4 men behind him, and he was exactly as advertised, not large but precise. The particular precision of a man who had learned that control was more effective than size. He wore a good coat and a hat that cost more than most men in the territory made in a month. And he looked at the cabin with the expression of someone appraising livestock. Clara was inside when she heard them coming. She went to the window. Then she did something that was not in any script, not something she had planned or decided on in advance. She took off her apron. She smoothed her hair. She walked to the door, and she opened it, and she stepped out onto the porch, and she stood there with her hands at her sides, and looked at the 5 men riding into her yard, with the absolute stillness of someone who has decided that stillness is power. Caleb came out of the barn to her left. He did not look at her when he came to stand at the edge of the porch. But she felt the almost imperceptible shift in his posture, the slight expansion of it, the straightening, and she understood that her being on the porch had changed the geometry of the moment. "Rourke," Hale said. He had a voice like a good lawyer, smooth calibrated, designed to sound reasonable in rooms where reasonable mattered. "Hale," Caleb said. Hale looked at Clara. "I didn't know you had family up here," he said. "I'm not family," Clara said before Caleb could answer. "My name is Clara Whitmore. I live here." Something moved through Hale's expression, an adjustment. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Victor Hale. I've come to have a conversation with Mr. Rourke about some business matters." "Then I imagine you'll be talking to both of us," Clara said. Hale looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Hale with the expression of a man who does not feel the need to explain himself. "She speaks for herself," Caleb said. Hale smiled. It was a practiced smile, the kind that had probably worked on people who had less experience reading the gap between what a face said and what it meant. "Of course," he said. "I'm simply here to make a business proposition. I'm looking to consolidate territory in this region. I'm prepared to be generous." "Define generous," Clara said. Another adjustment in his expression. Recalibrating. He hadn't expected her to run point on this. "A fair market price for the territorial rights. Your traplines, your stores, your claim on the ridge." He spread his hands. "You'd walk away with enough money to establish yourself comfortably in any settlement in the territory." "And the cabin," Clara said. A pause. Brief, but she caught it. "The property would transfer in full," he said. "So not just the territory," Clara said. "The home. Miss Whitmore, a man in Rourke's position." "Caleb's position," Clara said, "is that his claim on this land is legal documented, and as of 3 days ago, resurveyed and refiled with the territorial office in Benton Creek." She held Hale's gaze without blinking. "So the eastern boundary question you were planning to raise has already been resolved, in our favor." Complete silence. Behind Hale, one of his men shifted in the saddle. Hale's smile did not waver, but something behind his eyes did. "That was quick," he said. "We're efficient," Clara said. Hale looked at Caleb. "Rourke," he said, and the smoothness had acquired a slight edge, the way a blade acquires an edge when someone has been working on it. "I'm offering you a way out of a difficult situation. A man in your position, with your another tiny pause reputation, would do well to take a clean exit when it's offered." Clara watched Caleb's jaw. The muscle there tightened once, then released. "Mr. Hale," Caleb said, and his voice was the voice she had heard once before, low and quiet, and carrying something underneath that did not need to be loud to be understood. "I've been on this land for 11 years. I built the cabin. I ran the lines. I survived 11 winters up here without asking anything from anyone. My reputation is the valley's version of me, not the real one." He looked at Hale steadily. "The answer is no. It'll stay no. And I'd be obliged if you'd take your men and go." Hale looked at him. He looked at Clara. He looked at the 4 men behind him. Some private calculation happening behind his careful face. Then he looked back at Caleb. "Think it over," he said. "I'll be in the valley through the week." "I don't need the week," Caleb said. Hale held the look for exactly 2 beats longer than was comfortable. Then he touched the brim of his hat to Caleb, barely to Clara, not at all, which told her more about him than anything he had said, and he turned his horse and his 4 men followed him back down the trail. Clara waited until they were out of sight. Then she let out a breath that she had been holding since she walked out the door. "Well," she said. "Well," Caleb agreed. "He'll be back," she said. "Yes, and he won't come alone next time." "No." She turned and looked at him. He was looking at her with that expression, the complicated layered one, that she had been learning for 3 months and still sometimes caught her off guard with how much it held. "You knew about the eastern boundary," he said. "I read the documents." "You didn't tell me you were planning to use it." "I didn't plan it," she said. When he started talking, I knew we needed to move the ground under his feet before he had a chance to set his own." She paused. "Was that?" "It was perfect," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. "It was perfect, Clara," he said again, quietly and completely. She turned away before her face could do anything that would embarrass her. "We should send Hollis to Benton Creek again," she said. "I want to know if Hale makes any moves at the territorial office before the week is out." "I'll write to the sheriff too," Caleb said. "Dennison, he's not easily bought." "Does he know you?" "He knows of me," Caleb said. "Which isn't the same thing." "Does he know me?" Clara said. A pause. "No," Caleb said. "Then I'll write the letter to Dennison," Clara said. "A letter from a woman living on the property has a different weight than a letter from you in this situation. It changes the story." She could feel him thinking about this. "You're right," he said. "I know," she said without arrogance, just the flat confidence of someone who had read a situation correctly. "I've been changing stories my whole life. It's one of the things I'm good at." She wrote both letters that evening. The one to the sheriff was careful and precise, and painted a very clear picture of Victor Hale's intentions and the timeline of his approach, without melodrama, without complaint, with the particular authority of someone who was documenting facts for the record. She had learned this from her mother too, that the most powerful way to tell a truth was plainly with nothing embellishing it that might let the listener dismiss it. When she finished, she set the letters on the table and looked at Caleb. He was reading over her shoulder. She had not heard him move. "Sorry," he said, stepping back slightly. "Don't be," she said. "I want you to read them. It's your land." "It's yours too," he said. She looked up at him. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the letter, and his expression was doing the thing where it was doing several things at once, and none of them were small. "Caleb," she said. "It is," he said. "Yours too. Whatever Hale thinks, or your father thinks, or the valley thinks." He stopped, regrouped. "You've been here 3 months. You know this land. You know the trap line and the survey and the boundary and the supply stores. You fixed the east shutter and delivered Hollis coffee and named the mule and—" He stopped himself again. "I'm saying it badly." "No, you're not," she said softly. He looked at her. "You're saying it exactly right," she said. Something happened in the space between them. Not a dramatic rearrangement. More like the last piece of something falling into place. The small sound of a lock that has been almost closed, finally closing all the way. "I don't know what I can offer you," he said. "That's honest. I know what I am. I know what they say I am. I know this isn't—" He gestured at the cabin, the mountain, all of it. "This isn't an easy life." "I've never had an easy life," she said. "I know, but you could have one. There are places—" "Caleb." She stood up from the chair. She was not tall, but she was present, fully present in the way she had learned to be when something mattered. "I was traded for flour and salt meat. I had nothing. I came up this mountain expecting the worst." She looked at him steadily. "What I found was a man who slept on the floor so I could have the bed, who rode to Benton Creek in February weather for my brother's stepmother, who made me boots and let me name his mule and read to him in the evenings and looked at me like I was worth looking at." She let that land. "You want to tell me there's something better available somewhere else?" His jaw worked. "You deserve more than—" "Stop deciding what I deserve," she said. "I'll do that myself. That's the whole point." She took one step toward him. "You asked me once what I wanted. Do you remember?" Yes, he said. I want this, she said. I want to stay. Not because I have nowhere else to go, because this is where I want to be. A pause. I want to be here. With you. The fire burned. The mountain held its breath. Caleb Rourke, who had lived alone for 11 years and believed that was what he deserved, and believed the valley's version of him, and believed that the cost of loving something was always losing it, looked at Clara Whitmore standing in the middle of the cabin they had managed together for 3 months, and he crossed the space between them, and he put his hands very carefully on either side of her face, gentle as something he was afraid of breaking, and he said, I don't know how to be the man for this. Neither of us knows how, she said. We figure it out. He looked at her for one more long moment. Then he leaned down, and he kissed her careful and certain, and she put her hands against his chest and kissed him back, and the fire crackled, and the mountain was cold and vast and indifferent outside, and they were warm. She pulled back first. She needed to see his face. It was completely open, all the armor gone. Just a man who was terrified and full of something he did not have words for, looking at a woman who was looking back at him with steady eyes and no intention of going anywhere. All right, he said. All right, she agreed. That night she did not fall asleep in the chair. She lay in the bed, and he lay on the floor, and the fire burned between them, and she stared at the ceiling and thought that everything that had happened to her, the wagon, the trading post, the 40-minute ride, the father who had walked away without saying her name, had brought her precisely here to this specific ceiling, in this specific cabin, on this specific mountain, and she could not bring herself to call it loss. In the morning, the world outside had changed. She heard it before she saw it. A horse coming fast, too fast for a social call, and she was up and dressed before the rider reached the yard. It was Hollis. His face when he pulled up told her everything before he opened his mouth. Hale moved last night, he said. He filed a counterclaim at the territorial office. Benton Creek Circuit Judge signed it this morning. Clara felt the cold go through her. On what grounds? She said. Adverse possession, Hollis said. Claims Rourke's claim was abandoned. Says he has witnesses. That's a lie, Caleb said. Of course it's a lie, Hollis said. But he's got a judge, and he's got witnesses, and he's coming back up here today with a territorial marshal. Clara's mind was already moving. How long until they arrive? She said. 3 hours, maybe 4. And the counterclaim? Is it filed or is it pending review? Hollis looked at her. I don't know the difference, he said. I do, Clara said. Does Hale's man at the office, does he have a name? The one who handled the filing. Clerk named Peters, Hollis said. Clara turned to Caleb. The letter to Dennison, she said. Did it go out yesterday? With Hollis's boy, Caleb said. First thing. Then Dennison has it, she said. Which means the sheriff has documentation of Hale's stated intentions before the counterclaim was filed. She looked at Caleb. That changes the sequence. If Hale's claim is that the land was abandoned, but there's a letter from a resident of the property dated the day before the filing, he has a problem. Caleb was very still. We need to get to Benton Creek, he said. We need to get to Benton Creek before Hale's marshal gets here, she said. Which means we leave now. Clara, if the marshal arrives and there's nobody here. Let him arrive, she said. An empty cabin doesn't prove abandonment when we're on our way to the court to dispute the claim in person. It proves we had business to attend to. She looked at him. You ride Agnes. I'll take the roan. He stared at her. I'll be fine, she said. I know you'll be fine, he said. We're wasting time, she said. He nodded. They were saddled and moving within 15 minutes. It was the first time she had ridden alone in months, and the roan was faster than Agnes by a significant margin, and she gave the horse her head on the downhill sections, because she had learned to trust the animal's footing, and she needed the speed more than she needed the caution. Caleb rode beside her where the trail allowed it. There was no conversation. This was not the time for conversation. This was the time for moving and thinking, and she was doing both. Turning over legal arguments in her mind. The framework of territorial claim law that she had been absorbing for the last week through sheer necessity, looking for the angle, looking for the thing that would hold. She found it an hour into the ride. The original claim, she said. When was it filed? 68, he said. June. And the adverse possession window in Montana Territory is 7 years for an active claim. He looked at her. I read the survey documents, she said. All of them. 7 years, he said. His claim is that it's abandoned, but adverse possession requires 7 years of continuous non-use. She looked at the trail ahead. When is the last time you paid taxes on the land? A pause. Spring, he said. Every spring. To who? Territorial tax collector, man named Briggs. He comes up in April. And he has records, Clara said. He has records, Caleb said. Then Hale's adverse possession claim is worthless, Clara said. You can't claim abandonment on actively taxed property. That's not an argument. That's not even a good lie. She felt something crystallize. He's bluffing. He got a judge to sign something because the judge didn't ask the right questions. When someone asks the right questions, the whole thing falls apart. Caleb rode in silence for a moment. You figured that out in an hour, he said. I've been thinking about Hale since Hollis brought his name, she said. Another silence. Clara, he said. She looked at him. They were on a wider section of trail riding side by side, the world bright and cold around them. Whatever happens in Benton Creek today, he said. Whatever the judge says, whatever Hale does. He held her gaze. I need you to know that I would not trade this what we have here, what you've built with me, I would not trade it for anything Hale could give me. She looked at him. The man who had been traded for. Looking at her across a mountain trail and telling her that whatever she was not a transaction. I know, she said. I know that, Caleb. Good, he said. They rode on. Benton Creek came into sight in the early afternoon, and Clara sat straight on the roan and let the cold air hit her face and thought about everything that had brought her here. The flour and salt meat, the 40-minute wagon ride, the trading post, the father who had not looked back. She had come to this mountain as something to be disposed of. She was arriving in this town as something else entirely. She was arriving as herself. Ready, Caleb said. Yes, she said. They rode in together. The territorial office in Benton Creek smelled like pine resin and old paper, and the particular tension of a place where decisions got made that people had to live with for a long time afterward. Clara walked in first. Not because Caleb let her. Because she moved toward the door, and he reached past her to open it, and she walked through it. And that was simply how they were now, without discussion, without assignment, each of them moving where they were needed. The clerk at the front desk was a young man with ink-stained fingers and the look of someone who had not expected his afternoon to become complicated. He looked up when they came in, and then looked more carefully the way people looked at Caleb when they realized who he was. We're here about the Rourke claim, Clara said, before the young man could organize whatever reaction he was having into words. Filed 1868 June. There was a counterclaim submitted this morning by a man named Victor Hale. The clerk blinked. Ma'am, that matter's already been... Is it finalized? Clara said. Is the counterclaim finalized, or is it pending circuit review? She kept her voice entirely. She had learned this from watching Ruth manage her father, not the cruelty of it, but the technique. The way you could command a situation without raising your voice, if you moved with enough certainty. It's pending Judge Calloway's final signature, the clerk said. He's reviewing? Then we're in time, Clara said. We need to speak with Judge Calloway. Ma'am, the judge doesn't just... My name is Clara Whitmore, she said. I am a resident of the Rourke property. This is Caleb Rourke, the legal claim holder, who has paid territorial taxes on this land every spring for 11 years without exception, which the tax collector Briggs can confirm from his records. She put her hands flat on the desk. The counterclaim filed by Victor Hale alleges abandonment. That is legally impossible on actively taxed property, and if Judge Calloway signs it without hearing the evidence, he will be reversing that signature inside of a week when the tax records are entered into consideration. I am asking you to save him the trouble of that reversal by letting us speak with him now. The clerk stared at her. Then he looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back with the expression of a man who was entirely prepared to wait as long as necessary. "One moment," the clerk said, and disappeared through a door at the back. Clara took her hands off the desk. She breathed. Caleb appeared at her shoulder. "The tax records," he said very quietly. "You're sure Briggs has them going back far enough?" 11 years of spring collections, she said, equally quiet. "Even if he only keeps 7 years of records, that's sufficient. And government offices tend to keep longer than required because nobody wants to be the person who threw something away that turned out to matter." "How do you know that?" "My mother handled the taxes for 3 different families in our settlement when the men couldn't manage the paperwork," she said. "She took me with her sometimes. I paid attention." A pause. "Your mother," he said, "was a remarkable woman." "She was," Clara said. "I'm still catching up to her." He said nothing, but she felt his hand settle at the small of her back, brief and steady as a wall. The clerk returned. "Judge Calloway will see you," he said with the expression of someone who was not entirely sure how this had happened. Judge Calloway was a man of about 65 with a white beard and the measured, unhurried quality of someone who had heard a great many stories and learned to wait for the part that mattered. He looked at Clara with the particular attention that men of his generation gave to women who walked into rooms they weren't expected to enter, and then he looked at Caleb, and then he folded his hands on his desk. "Mr. Rourke," he said. "Judge," Caleb said, "I'm given to understand you have an objection to this morning's filing." "We do," Clara said. Calloway looked at her. "Miss Whitmore," she said before he could ask, "I live on the Rourke property. I'm here as a resident witness and as the person who has been managing the legal documentation of the claim for the past 3 months." Something moved in Calloway's expression. Not dismissal, she had expected dismissal and been prepared to push through it. Something closer to reassessment. "Sit down," he said. They sat. Clara laid out the argument. She did it the way her mother had taught her to do anything that mattered in order without excess, starting with the fact that was hardest to dispute and moving outward from there. Active taxation. Continuous occupancy. The resurvey filed 2 days prior. The letter to Sheriff Dennison documenting Hale's stated intentions before the counterclaim was submitted, which established a pattern of strategic rather than legitimate claim. Calloway listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You're not a lawyer," he said. "No, sir," she said. "Where did you learn to read territorial claim law?" "From the documents themselves," she said. "And from necessity." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb. "Your woman is more prepared than half the attorneys I see in this office," he said. "She's not my woman," Caleb said. "She's her own. She just happens to live on my mountain." Clara felt something move through her at those words, warm and precise, settling into place. Calloway almost smiled. "The tax records will need to be verified," he said. "I'll send for Briggs this afternoon. If they confirm what you've said, the counterclaim fails on its own merits, and I'll note the circumstances of its filing for the record." He paused. "Mr. Hale will not be pleased." "No," Caleb said. "He won't." "He has influence in this territory," Calloway said. "Not as a warning exactly, more as an acknowledgement of the landscape." "So do honest men," Clara said, "when they stay in one place long enough and people learn to trust them." Calloway looked at her. "Indeed," he said. They were outside, standing in the cold afternoon air of Benton Creek's Main Street, when the next thing happened. Clara heard him before she saw him. Her father's voice. "Clara." She turned. Elias Whitmore was standing at the edge of the street 20 feet away, in the same coat she had last seen him in outside Hadley's trading post 3 months ago. He looked smaller than she remembered. That was the first thing she noticed. He had always seemed large to her. Large in the way that people who hold authority over you seem large, inflated by the power they have over your daily life. Without that power, he was just a man of medium height, with a worried face standing in the mud of a February street. Thomas was not with him. She looked for Thomas and did not find him. "Clara," her father said again. She walked toward him, not quickly, not slowly, with the same measured pace she had used walking into Calloway's office. Caleb moved to follow her. She put a hand up just briefly. He stopped. She faced her father alone. "Papa," she said. He looked at her. All of her, the boots, the coat, the way she stood. "You look different," he said. "I am different," she said. He worked his jaw. He had the look of a man carrying something heavy that he was not sure how to set down. "Ruth is better," he said. "The Dr. Aldrich. He came through. She's going to be fine." "I'm glad," Clara said. And she was. Whatever Ruth was, whatever their relationship had been, she was Thomas's stepmother, and Thomas loved her, and Clara loved Thomas. "I heard what happened," her father said, "with Hale." "It's handled," she said. "Is it?" "Yes." He looked past her at Caleb, then back at her. "Clara," he said, and his voice changed, dropped into something that was not his authority voice or his apologetic voice, but something older and more unsteady. The voice of a man who had finally run out of the particular self-deception that had been sustaining him. "I did wrong by you." She looked at him. She waited. "I told myself it was necessary," he said. "I told myself there wasn't another way. The boy needed—" He stopped. "I know that's not an excuse. I know it doesn't. I know." He looked at his hands. "Your mother would not have—" He could not finish it. "No," Clara said. "She wouldn't have." Silence. The street moved around them. People passing horses. The ordinary noise of a small territorial town on an afternoon indifferent to the weight of what was happening on this particular piece of ground. "Thomas asks about you," her father said. "Every day. He—" He stopped again. The man was finding speech very difficult, and she recognized it, recognized the way grief and shame conspire to close a person's throat. "He says to tell you that he hasn't been afraid of the dark, like you told him." Something moved in Clara's chest. She pressed on. "I'm not coming home," she said. "I need you to understand that. Not as a punishment. Not because I hate you." She paused, checking the truth of that, because she owed them both honesty. "I don't hate you. I spent some time doing that and it was exhausting and it didn't change anything." She looked at him steadily. "But I have a life now, a real one, and I'm not leaving it." He nodded, slowly. The nod of a man accepting something he had no right to refuse. "The man," he said, "Rourke. He treats you with respect," she said. "With consideration. He treats me like a person whose choices matter." She let that land. "It took me 23 years to find someone who did that." Her father flinched. She had not said it to wound him. She had said it because it was true, and she was done softening truths for other people's comfort. "I'm glad," he said very quietly. "I'm glad you found it." A long moment. "Thomas can come up this mountain in spring," she said. "When the trail is clear. He can spend time, learn things, if you allow it." Her father looked at her. "You do that," he said. "He's my brother," she said. "That doesn't change because you made a bad choice. That doesn't change because I left." She looked at him clearly. This man who had traded her for supplies. This man who had walked out of a trading post without saying her name. This man who was also the one who had taught her to drive a nail straight and read a weather sky and never waste salt. This complicated, insufficient, loving, failed man who was her father. "He needs his Clara. He told you that himself, I'd wager." Elias Whitmore's eyes went bright. He pressed his lips together and looked away and then looked back. "He did," he said. "Spring," Clara said. "When the trail clears, you send him up." "I will," he said. She looked at him one more moment. Then she did something she had not planned. She stepped forward and she put her arms around him briefly, the way you hold someone when the hold is the most honest thing left to say. He stiffened with surprise. Then his arms came up and he held her back awkwardly tightly, like a man who had forgotten how and was trying to remember. She stepped back. "Take care of yourself, Papa," she said. He nodded. He could not speak. She turned and walked back toward Caleb. I was watching her with those storm-gray eyes, calm and present, and entirely there. "All right," he said. "Yes," she said. "We should start back. The trail gets worse after dark." "I know," she said. They rode back up the mountain. She did not look back at Benton Creek as it shrank behind them. She had done enough looking back. She was learning the particular freedom of a person who has decided that forward is where the story is. The cabin was undisturbed. No Marshall. No sign of Hale. Whatever plan had been in motion that morning had been interrupted by their trip to the territorial office, and by the time they arrived home, the late afternoon had softened into early evening, and the fire had burned down to coals, and the whole mountain was quiet. In the specific way, it was quiet in the hour before dark. She built the fire. He checked Agnes and the goats and came back in and told her Agnes was fine and had attempted to bite him again, which was becoming a reliable measure of the animal's good health. "She does that when she's content," Clara said. "That's a terrible way to express contentment," he said. "She's a mule," Clara said. "She expresses it the way she likes." He sat at the table. She stayed near the fire. The cabin settled around them warm and solid the way it always did at this hour. "Your father," he said. "Not a question exactly." "We understood each other," she said. "I think for maybe the first time." She turned the coffee pot on its hook. "It's not the same as forgiveness, but it's the thing you do before forgiveness. Acknowledgement." "That he was wrong," Caleb said. "That he was wrong," she confirmed. "And that I'm not going back, and that Thomas can come in spring." She looked at the fire. He looked old. Older than 3 months should make a person. "Regret does that," Caleb said. She looked at him. "Does it?" she said. He met her gaze. "I spent 11 years regretting what happened with my brother's family," he said. "I know what it does to a face." She crossed the room and sat across from him at the table. "Do you still?" she said. He thought about it honestly, the way he thought about everything. "I still carry it," he said. "I reckon I always will. What happened to Margaret and Lily because of me, that's real, and pretending it isn't, doesn't make me a better man. It just makes me a man who pretends." He looked at his hands. "But carrying it isn't the same as being defined by it. I didn't know that until—" He stopped. "Until what?" she said. He looked up at her. "Until you told me I didn't get to only keep the version that punishes me," he said. "First week you were here, at this table." She remembered. "I say things without thinking sometimes," she said. "You say things with more thought than almost anyone I've ever met," he said. "That's different from without thinking." She looked at him across the table. This man. This complicated, careful, wounded, capable, gentle, enormous book reading, hawk drawing, mule naming, floor sleeping man who had walked into a trading post and seen her clearly from across the room and made a decision that had changed everything. "What do you want?" she said. "Not for the land or the claim or any of that. For yourself. What do you actually want?" He was quiet for a long time. The fire answered questions, the way fires always did, by being steady and warm and indifferent to what was being asked of them. "I want what's in this cabin," he said finally. "I want this." He looked at the room around him, the shelves, the books, the drawings in the loft. Agnes sleeping in the outbuilding. Eleanor roosting in her spruce above the creek. "I want you reading in the evenings. I want to hear you talk to Agnes in the morning like she understands you, which she probably does. I want to learn what you know and teach you what I know, and see what we can make out of the combination." He looked at her directly. "I want to marry you, Clara. If you'd have me. Not to own you. Not to claim you. Because you're the person I want to stand beside for whatever comes next." The room was very still. Clara sat with it. She turned it over the way she turned everything over, looking for the thin ice, the place where the weight would not hold. She had learned to do this with good things as carefully as with bad, because good things that are fragile can break you worse than bad ones if you're not paying attention. It held. Every part of it held. "Caleb Rourke," she said. "Clara Whitmore," he said. "You slept on the floor for 3 months," she said. "You deserve the bed," he said. "I was trying to say yes," she said. He blinked. Then something happened that she had only seen once before, on the night of the intruders, That brief, lightning flash of a real, complete, unguarded smile that transformed his face into the face of the man Daniel Rourke had known and loved and given a novel to. She reached across the table and took his hand. He looked at their hands. Then he looked at her. "Yes," she said. "Caleb. The answer is yes." His hand tightened around hers. Not roughly, just firmly. The way you hold something you intend to keep. The next morning she woke up before he did the way she always did. She built the fire. She made coffee. She stood at the window and looked out at the mountain in the early morning light, at the creek and the spruce where Eleanor had her nest, and the trail that wound down toward the valley, and the world that had tried several times and in several different ways to reduce her to less than she was. She heard Caleb wake up behind her. She heard the small, familiar sounds of him rising the creak of the floor, the particular way he moved in the morning, unhurried and deliberate. A big man who had learned to move carefully in spaces shared with other people. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she said. She did not turn from the window yet. She was looking at something. Out on the creek trail, in the thin early light, Eleanor was riding a thermal above the spruce red tail, catching what sun there was spiraling upward with the particular effortless patience of a creature that trusted the air to hold her. "Eleanor's up early," Clara said. He came to stand beside her at the window. She felt the warmth of him at her shoulder. They watched the hawk together. "She does that sometimes," he said. "When the conditions are right, goes up and just stays up there." "I know why," Clara said. He looked at her. "Because from up there," she said, "you can see everything. You can see exactly where you are." He was quiet. "And where are you?" he said. She looked at the creek and the spruce and the sky where Eleanor was a dark shape against a pale sky rising. "Home," she said. She meant it the way she had meant it when she told Thomas. "The way you mean something that has moved past, needing to be argued for, past needing to be explained or defended or earned. The way you mean something that has simply become true." She was Clara Whitmore, who had been traded for flour and salt meat on a morning in December, who had come up a mountain expecting the worst, and found instead the thing she had been looking for, without knowing she was looking for it, which was not rescue and not safety, and not even love exactly, though love was part of it. What she had found was herself. The woman who stood her ground when Garrett came, who sent letters to judges, who took down a rifle with steady hands, who built fires and read aloud and named a mule and learned to skin a rabbit, and taught a man who had been alone for 11 years that the version of him the valley told was not the only version available. Who told her father she was not coming home, and then held him anyway, because that was who she was, a woman who could hold two true things at once, without either one breaking the other. That woman had always been there. She had simply been waiting for ground solid enough to stand on. She had found it. Here on this mountain, in this cabin, beside this man who held her hand firmly and called her his, and meant by that, not possession, but partnership, not ownership, but belonging. The particular and irreplaceable belonging of two people who have chosen each other out of all the available choices. The hawk circled higher. The fire burned warm behind them. Outside, somewhere in the outbuilding, Agnes began to make the sounds she made in the morning when she felt she had been kept waiting long enough, which sounded like complaint and meant contentment, because that was Agnes, and Agnes expressed herself the way she liked. Caleb sighed, not unhappily. "I'll go," he said. "She'll bite you," Clara said. "She always bites me," he said. "She does it when she's content." Clara smiled. He reached up and touched her face once, the way you touch something real to make sure it's real, and then he went for his coat and his boots, and he went out the door into the cold morning, and she heard his voice a moment later, low and familiar, talking to Agnes, the way you talk to someone who knows you. Clara turned back to the window. Eleanor was still up there, still rising. Clara watched until the hawk was a speck against the wide sky, and then she turned back to the warm room, the fire, the shelves with their labeled supplies, and the books with their cracked spines, and the table where letters had been written, and arguments had been made, and two people had learned each other across the long mountain winter. She picked up her coffee. She thought about her mother and what she had always said about worth, and she thought that Margaret Whitmore had been right in the way that certain people are right, not about the specific details of the future, which nobody can see, but about the shape of it, the essential thing underneath. Clara Whitmore was worth more than she had been told. She always had been. She had simply needed a place where that was allowed to be true. She had it now, and she intended to keep it.